As with many others in the LA podcasting scene, the career of Adam22 is littered with mostly petty drama and a few other seriously devious controversies. Just like the subject of my last video, Adam has left us with the archives of a now deleted blog, filled with some incredible content which gives us great insight into him as a person. And as many of you know, Adam Grandmason is no regular person. It's common knowledge that his father, Philip J. Grandmason, received a presidential pardon from Bill Clinton after a mail fraud conviction, although the exact details have been glossed over and largely ignored.
Well, your Wikipedia, it says that your father was really good friends with Bill Clinton.
He was.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, my dad helped him win his initial presidency, and then my dad went down for a fucking basically like a corporate crime type thing where he was like accused of misusing his power in the local government. Bill Clinton leaves office a couple of years later, and Bill Clinton gives my dad a presidential pardon.
Awesome.
Nice. Epic.
Because he had been them early on in his career and stuff. So I have all these like photos of my family with the Clintons.
What many people don't know is that he comes from a multi-generational lineage of well-connected political officials. His grandfather, Oscar Napoleon Grandmason, a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, was appointed Director of Selective Service by John F. Kennedy in 1973. His uncle Joe Grandmason served as Jimmy Carter's co-chair on the New England Regional Trade Commission, Clinton's director of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and as Bush's director of the Export-Import Bank. His father was a Nashua alderman who sat on the Joint Special School Building Committee. His use of this position would generate some controversy following the increased publicity of his 1991 run for mayor. In an incident mirroring one which would eventually result in an 18-month prison sentence, Adam's father used his political office to land his cousin's company, Scrap Metals Inc., lucrative trash hauling contracts for local school projects in 1986. This would briefly make the press 3 years later when he sought re-election as alderman, although the accusers remained anonymous and nothing came of it. Less than a year later, the board began seeking construction bids for a $6 million school renovation project. Ekman Construction, a company for which Adam's father was the director of marketing, submitted a bid for the contract while he was still serving on the board. Grandmason would eventually recuse himself on January 9, 1991, only after questions were raised about the obvious conflict of interest. Ekman would end up being awarded the contract 2 months later, sparking renewed suspicion surrounding Grandmason's impropriety. The other aldermen would be reassured of his innocence by City Attorney Mark Bennett, reminding them that he had stepped down from the board prior to the granting of this contract. The situation would fade away for a couple of months until Philip unveiled his plans to run for mayor. Immediately following, his political opponents would dig up both the trash hauling scandal from '86 and the more recent Ekman controversy, and call for an investigation based on a recurring pattern of behavior. The same city attorney who had defended Philip just a few months prior would rule that Grandmason violated city conduct regulations. However, a unanimous vote on behalf of the other aldermen cleared Philip of any allegations. Grandmason responded by publicly requesting an investigation into the attorney, claiming that he was in political collusion with his opponent in the ongoing mayoral race, Barbara Presley. Philip also employed another alderman, Steve Kaczynski, who would later confess to accepting bribes from Grandmason during the Ackerman scandal, to call for his resignation. This would culminate in the acting mayor, James Donchis, blasting both Grandmason and Kaczynski in the press. The negative attention that this would generate not only resulted in him losing the race for mayor, ending up in third out of only 4 candidates, but also cemented some political enemies and increased suspicion around Nashua politics as a whole. He would continue to serve for another 2 years until the FBI opened up an investigation into both Grandmason and Ekman in 1993. He would eventually plead guilty to mail fraud on February 8, 1995, and serve 18 months in jail. Adam's father would be one of 59 people pardoned by Bill Clinton on December 23, 2000. I tell you all this first and foremost because it's interesting, but more importantly, to provide proper context as to the type of environment Adam grew up in. So as we begin to venture through his online history, we can compare Adam's description of his own life to the actual reality of the situation. Because as you might expect from someone who spent the last 2 decades vying for internet fame, there are plenty of inconsistencies. The earliest verifiable record we have of Adam's online activity dates all the way back to the mid-2000s. B9board.com was a message board centered around a subgenre of punk music known as hardcore. Adam would become an infamous member of this community through his wild contributions and continuous drama. While no archive of the original entries currently exists, Adam would recount his most notable moments a few years later when he started his blog, surfingbeans.com, in 2009. This site is filled with gold, with titles ranging from beating up black people, the Desiree story, and the time a girl accused me of rape. We'll start with the Desiree story, as this one's definitely the most sinister. In the following entry, Adam details his relationship with a 16-year-old girl he connected with on MySpace, who is also an active user of the B9 board. While being 23 at the time, he would end up getting her number, engaging in sexual conversation over the phone that would eventually culminate in making plans for him to travel to Canada to act out these fantasies. He would say verbatim that if statutory rape is wrong, then I don't want to be right, and then bring up the age of consent laws in Canada to further justify his degeneracy. He states that the only thing that held him back from following through with this was his ongoing relationship. Less than 3 years later, he would rekindle this romance, making do on the seeds he had originally planted. He would litter the post with near-nude photos of the girl, assuring us that most of them were taken when she was 18-19. These pictures included her entire face, and Adam mentions in part 2 that he originally included her full first and last name, only changing it after she called him frantically over 20 times. The remainder of part 1 is mostly uninteresting, just going into vivid detail about their affair for paragraphs on end, like he's some woman writing erotic literature. In part 2 he talks about flying her out to New York, introducing her to his family, only to get unknowingly cucked by some niche band member. Part 3, Desiree's rebuttal, includes her disputing minor elements of the story. Mainly, she claims that she told Adam about sleeping with another guy on his dime, crying to him about it in bed, before going on to do the same thing the very next day. He maintains that she deceived him, so you can make up your own mind about what happened, but as we'll see later, I think we all know what happened. Next, we'll cover the blog, Getting Accused of. The post begins with a brief description of Adam's life in 2005, claiming to have supported himself through playing poker and selling shoplifted items on eBay, something commonly resorted to by the children of presidential pardon recipients. He would follow up this obvious lie with a mildly unflattering introduction of the other subject in the story, JC. This was another active user of the B9 board that Adam had connected with through MySpace. After a few dates, they would eventually wind up back at Adam's apartment, where an awkward sexual encounter would take place. Adam describes her as having a reaction of indifference to his advances, reciprocating minutely, but makes sure to mention that he asked her repeatedly for verbal consent. He would eventually give up after her continued lack of interest. They would end up hanging out a few more times platonically, until having another sexual encounter, in which Adam says she was significantly more engaged. They would eventually drift apart, but after some unprompted threats from a few board members, Adam would learn that she had been telling people that he had raped her. He would confront this accusation head-on by posting a thread on the B9 board titled, "Attention, Stay Gold." Here, he would lay out his argument as to why the sexual interaction was consensual, and speculate about a possible ulterior motive for her allegations. She would respond to the thread with her description of the events, which Adam states were entirely fabricated, and paraphrase them as, "You can make jokes all you want about this, but you don't know what it's like to have a guy as big as Adam on top of you, refusing to take no for an answer." He says that her retelling of the story was so detailed that it left him second-guessing himself momentarily, racing through his memories of their relationship, wondering if there was something he could have missed. Adam assured himself that this was an impossibility, buttressed by the overwhelming support from the other members on the forum. He reflects on the success this post had in clearing his name, summarizing it in a few bullet points. The first being his willingness to draw attention to the claim by addressing it so publicly, arguing that if he had actually committed the act, he would be trying to resolve this as privately as possible. The second being testimony by 3 other female members of the board, who described their sexual encounters with Adam as entirely normal. The third being other male posters claiming JC was a pathological liar, who had accused several other men of similar crimes. The fourth were links to threads of Adam and JC speaking as friends publicly, months after the alleged assault took place. The fifth being Adam's insistence that she report him to the police if she actually believed what she was saying. It turns out I read this blog before any others on the site, and my initial reaction was that while you can poke holes in each of these arguments, some of which Adam does himself, I find his willingness to continuously bring this up, even years after the fact, to not resemble your traditional guilty subject, even taking into account the fact that this is a one-sided recollection of events, in isolation. This explanation makes intuitive sense to me. But as I started to read through some of his other posts on the site, the alternative explanation began to seem a lot more plausible. The last entry of any significance is San Diego Story Part 2. We beat up black people. Here, Adam lays out a fairly standard day of BMXing that suddenly turned violent once he pulled out his camera to film a line. Multiple black people he describes as homeless begin berating Adam about not filming them, resulting in him and his friends firing back a little bit. This raises tensions to the point that Adam deems it necessary to deliver the first blow, hoisting his bike over his head by the seat in the crossbar and slamming it into the man's skull. The remaining homeless get involved, resulting in Adam and his friends bludgeoning them with their bikes as well. I'm not really passing moral judgment on this story in particular. I just find it funny, especially considering the direction his career would take in the following years. Speaking of Adam's career, at the time in which these blogs were being written, he had already generated a small amount of internet fame. Taking the idea from the B9 board, he would start his own message board centered around a different niche subject, BMX. The come up, as it was known, became successful fairly quickly, generating plenty of engagement and eventually ad revenue, reinforcing the glaring potential of online businesses in Adam's head for years to come. This would culminate in his eventual transition out of the world of BMX and into the sphere of hip-hop through his podcast No Jumper. Adam would capitalize on the connections he had formed in his previous industry, landing long-form interviews with up-and-coming rappers during the initial rise of SoundCloud rap. This transitional period for the music industry provided Adam with a never-ending supply of minutely successful artists. It was inevitable that a certain percentage would go on to see mainstream success, with several becoming household names shortly after their interviews. Not only was Adam getting the first ever interviews from these future stars.
This is your first ever interview.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
First.
Very excited.
First ever.
I'm nervous as
But the younger generation's hostility towards legacy media outlets left these as the only interviews in existence long after their initial rise to prominence. As a result, individual podcasts went on to receive tens of millions of views, cementing No Jumpers the de facto hub for this burgeoning scene. Music industry executives would quickly see the potential in the No Jumper brand, and Atlantic Records would launch the No Jumper record label in March of 2018. This partnership would only last 9 months, falling apart after 2 women would accuse Adam of sexual assault at the height of the Me Too movement. One of these being JC from the previous blog entry, and the other being Desiree. Adam claims that the allegations had nothing to do with the Atlantic fallout, and it was simply the end of a year-long contract they chose not to renew. Although Adam went on to receive massive backlash on Twitter, most of his audience stuck by him. His response seemed reasonable enough. In the broader societal context surrounding the Me Too movement, its propensity for destroying people over the most minor sexual improprieties made people even more skeptical. This entire controversy would have little to no effect on his career outside of the questionable label fallout. His audience would persist and things carried on normally. As the SoundCloud wave began to die off, Adam saw the need to evolve his business if it was going to survive. He transitioned his revenue model from mainly artist interviews to personality-based podcasts centered around hip-hop culture at large, hiring on several relatively unknown co-hosts and granting them their own shows on his multi-million subscriber channel. With hip-hop culture having entered a new era centered around gang activity brought about by drill music, the most prominent additions were all gang members or at least affiliated with elements of street life. AD was a 30-year-old Compton Crip and part-time rapper whose career highlight up to this point was being the hype man for OT Genesis. Quite the resume, I know. Trell was a Hoover Street Crip that after a brief stint as Tyga's blunt roller.
What up, man? I'm King Trell, man. I'm Tyga's right-hand man. And Tyga's right-hand man means Tyga doesn't do I do everything and he doesn't do anything. And you wouldn't want this job, I'm telling you.
Piggybacked off of that inroad to start the Last King's clothing brand. This supposedly made him a multi-millionaire and provided the startup capital for his alcoholic wife's clothing store.
Are you so thirsty there?
I'm clout thirsty.
I will break your cabinet. I'll break that shit. For sure.
I know you will. You're a big body.
Oh, yeah, I am.
Despite their tremendous wealth, Trell and his wife would start a GoFundMe to raise as little as $15,000. This was after a nearby fire hydrant was struck and flooded their store. This left many in the No Jumper audience, the main contributors to the GoFundMe, curious as to the true financial state of Trell. For a man who bragged about his millions and flaunted the elevator in his home, to not have $15,000 to spare, or at least the foresight to take out insurance, seemed a little suspicious. Sharp was a literal pimp who rose to prominence after his interview with Soft White Underbelly, a platform based around showcasing members of various underworlds.
I got into the ism, man, when I was 14, 15 years old. You know, young. You know, I grew up around your standard pimps and drug dealers and prostitutes and crackheads and, you know, your everyday model of f***ed up society.
Sharp would prove to be the most successful addition after clips of his screaming matches consistently went viral.
He downplaying everything. Am I tripping on that? No, you suck, nigga. You suck.
Fuck you talking
Yo,
about?
nigga, your aura suck. It don't matter. It don't matter. Cause stop speaking to her. Maybe.
I forgot. That is what you said.
Each of their individual shows would go on to see varying levels of success, but success nonetheless, averaging 25 million views a month on YouTube alone. Along with doing live shows, Adam would reveal that No Jumper was bringing in around $1 million a month in total revenue. This success was in part due to excellent casting, hiring people who were charismatic enough to carry a show when provided with a built-in audience. However, the main contributing factor to the overwhelming success of this era was the very thing which would eventually lead to its downfall: the hyperfixation on inter-office drama. Fights, arguments, and headline-grabbing degeneracy had long been a staple of the No Jumper brand, but the interview format was reliant on outside forces, of which Adam had little control over, to bring the drama to him. If Adam could bring on some capable but unknown co-hosts, who were in turn partially indebted to him for their media careers, he could exercise enough influence over the direction of their content to create his very own new media reality show. And that's exactly what he did.
That's crazy. This shit is fraud. This is all at the top.
Show me some original shit.
This culture wasn't solely the product of Adam's grand direction. There's obviously the pre-existing incentive structure of view counts, even if they're being paid a salary, but Adam would continuously encourage hosts to resolve conflicts on air, inevitably leading to fights that would be discussed for weeks following. While this hostile and chaotic work environment was the primary contributor to No Jumper's collapse, the second reason may come as a surprise given everything I've told you about Adam thus far. Adam's generosity in allowing the co-hosts that he made famous to start their own shows separate from No Jumper took their energy and focus off of the main product. Other major podcast networks are famous for non-compete clauses that restrict employees' ability to create outside of that company. Adam's willingness to extend them this level of freedom shows the degree of trust, neediness, and/or lack of business acumen that I can't exactly make sense of. He may have seen the controversy caused by contracts and ownership discussions endured by Joe Budden, and believed that allowing his co-hosts to have complete ownership over their side projects would instill a sense of loyalty. Instead, this would only serve to distract them from their primary job, the original source of their newfound fame, as well as provide further incentive to leave during one of the never-ending controversies. The first domino to fall wasn't actually one of the new additions. It was Adam's old friend, Housephone. Lil Housephone is another 30-year-old failed rapper who Adam brought on a little earlier than the others on account of them being personal friends. A lazy druggie who routinely missed shows without notice, in part due to his mother's illness, which is understandable, but mostly as a result of his aforementioned party lifestyle. His friendship with Adam resulted in a litany of second chances not extended to the average employee. But this friendship couldn't shield him from Adam's avarice entirely. Once Housephone became aware that Adam planned on interviewing a transgender person he had slept with, he spoke to Adam, denying having done so, and Adam proceeded to interview him.
I talked to you about it, and you said, nah, nothing like that ever happened.
During the interview, the transgender would expose Housephone's strange sexual proclivities to the world. Housephone would ask Adam to not post the interview in its entirety, but eventually agreed upon editing out this segment.
You saw the text messages
not to
of me
put it out. I asked you not to put it out.
You asked me to edit it out.
I asked you not to put it out. The first thing that I said was, can you not put it out? But I knew as soon as I came out of my mouth that I was wasting my breath.
The version that would actually air only censored out Housephone's name.
I feel like a straight man soliciting. I feel like I gotta talk in the stereotypical John voice, like, hey, you know, I want to come sit down in my car
That's
for
what
a little
Johns
bit.
talk like?
Yeah.
That's what we think.
No, they talk more like this. Never mind.
Come on, let's hear the
No,
impression.
I was going to impersonate someone that I shouldn't impersonate.
Oh, come on. You've already sold out your entire life here.
Well, yeah, well.
but it didn't take a master lip reader when presented in its full context. The firestorm that erupted resulted in Housephone coming clean, but Adam receiving the majority of the derision for his treatment of a close friend. During his on-air confrontation with Housephone, Adam would claim that he tried his best to get the clip removed, and that his text messages to the editor proved this.
You had the power in your hand for it not to happen at all.
And you saw the text messages of me trying in vain to make that happen, right? You saw the editor come on and apologize.
Honestly, Adam, you are so fucked in the head. I think that you took those you sent out those texts so it could look like you gave a fuck, so you could have proof. You'd have
Can
screenshots.
we ask, do you think Michael and Boston Over are liars? Do you want to?
Housephone would note a lack of care in Adam's voice when they spoke over the phone, and speculate about his potentially malevolent intentions.
I don't know what type of weird animosity you got towards me. I don't know what it is,
bro. You really think that? You really think I have animosity towards you?
Housephone would eventually admit that he didn't think that Adam intentionally outed him, but that he just handled it poorly after the fact.
Bro, you actually permanently altered my life. Do you understand
saw
that?
those text messages, and you really believe that I did that to you on purpose?
I don't believe that you did it on purpose. You handled it poorly afterwards.
He would flip-flop on this point in an emotional outburst for a couple more minutes, before concluding that if Adam actually cared about him, he would have scrapped the podcast entirely.
I did, and that's why I told them to delete it.
Nigga, you would have deleted the whole fucking interview, Adam.
I mean, in retrospect, yes, I wish we did that.
Housephone would then complain about Adam referring to his mom's death as going through the mom shit, interpreting this as somehow demeaning.
Let's move forward to that bullshit-ass apology you gave when you're on the fucking news. You're talking about, yeah, he's been going through the mom shit. He's been going through the health shit. You talking about the person that fucking raised me?
Adam would respond to the claim that he lacked empathy towards his mother's passing by bringing up the fact that he paid for her funeral.
Are you actually acting like I have some kind of disrespect for your mom when
You're
I fucking
disrespectful as fuck.
I paid for the fucking funeral as soon as it happened.
This sent Housephone into a rage, throwing his drink on Adam and proceeding to be held back impotently by the co-hosts. He bellowed out about how he didn't pay for shit and only gave him money for it.
You ain't pay for shit, nigga. Nigga, you gave me some money, nigga. You didn't pay for the fucking funeral, nigga.
I can empathize with the man going through a whirlwind of emotions at the intersection of several traumatic events, but this is the internet, and pretty much what you can expect when you exchange your privacy for cash. Housephone would end up leaving the company along with a few of his orbiters, but the entirety of the main cast decided to remain. Things returned to normal for the next couple of months, up until the live firing of a newer cast member known as Lush 1. Lush is a 40-year-old wigger and former battle-rapping crackhead who started his quest for fame as an extra in Hollywood, coming on board No Jumper alongside the much more successful battle rapper Disaster. He would quickly rise up the ranks through his incessant glazing of Adam. His sycophancy was rewarded with a spot on the main show and the unofficial position as Adam's right-hand man. Adam quickly extended his trust and began confiding in Lush about workplace drama and business decisions. Lush would proceed to go on a public Discord server and repeat Adam's private opinions on other employees, as well as discuss salary information. This would obviously lead to his very public and awkward firing.
Lush, you lied to me.
What?
You lied to me, Lush.
About what?
What I just tried to talk to you about in the hall?
Nah.
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah.
I didn't say nothing.
Well, I got confirmation from a bunch of different people.
Nah, fool.
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah. Bro, I've talked to you about talking in the fucking Discord and saying crazy shit, but I never knew that you were this fucking loony with it, bro. Like direct quotes of shit that I said only to you because I fucking trusted you. Talking about how much people get paid and shit, bro.
No, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
That's complete cap.
I honestly think, at least for now, maybe we could come to the bottom of this at some point, but it's probably better that you just leave.
All right, man.
Thank you.
But the fallout from this incident was far from over. After his public humiliation, Lush would show AD text messages from Adam that contained some very mild criticism. Adam would rip AD for his constant rehashing of the same 4 jokes, and cited his lack of focus as the impetus for his recent removal from the main show. Whether it was the criticism itself, Adam's willingness to go behind his back, Lush's newcomer status, and a perceived lack of respect for his seniority, this turned out to be the final straw for AD. He would leave the network along with Trell and nearly every other main host apart from Sharp. During their response stream, they cited the hostile, drama-fueled work environment, Adam's recurring power trips, and the channel's change in direction towards edgier and more politically charged subjects as the main reasons for their departure.
I want to go a different direction with this. Y'all niggas, y'all not gonna want to go with me.
Yeah.
So I feel like y'all
I'ma do
big
the
enough to do y'all thing. Go y'all way. I'm gonna go this way.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the white supremacist thing a lot. So
yeah.
And look,
y'all might not f- with
It's
that.
gonna be a lot of hard R in this motherfucker.
Yeah.
You feel me?
They mentioned that they had been planning on leaving for quite some time now, no doubt influenced by the freedom Adam granted them to start their own platforms.
I think we made the right decision. It definitely was inevitable for us because we was already gonna make that move. You know, we was gonna make that move. It was already there for us.
They also discussed the fact that Ace Boy Pun, an obese man who sits in the background of AD's streams, had been consistently pushing them to leave.
I know T-Rail was ready to rock forever, man, and you know the Punstigator, man, he in the back like, watch this, and I'm like,
And that shit just all kept unfolding.
it just kept nose diving, man.
Fans speculate about Pun's level of influence on their decision and question his true intentions, claiming that Pun was resentful towards Adam for refusing to bring him on as a full-time member. Whatever the true motivation for their exit, it's clear that Adam is a terrible boss that bears the majority of the responsibility for his company's implosion. Views had already been on the decline for months, on account of the hosts dedicating more time to their own channels, showing up without energy or even interest in the content. Engagement would continue to plummet after the mutiny, which resulted in even more people being let go and even less content being produced. Things began to bounce back slightly last month, although we'll see if this trend continues. As far as AD and T-Rail, they went on to start the channel Cuhmunnity World. This atrocious name is the result of them inelegantly cramming together their two individual brands, Back on Fig and Cuhmunnity. The channel is seeing some mild success, bringing in a little over 2 million views last month. Their individual channels are continuing to succeed as well, receiving 3 and 4 million views a month respectively. As far as what conclusions we can draw about Adam as a person, is he an actual sociopath who would throw his longtime friend under the bus for views? Does this make him capable of sexual assault as he's been accused of? I haven't even mentioned the fact that him and his wife are OnlyFans stars, and if this wasn't bad enough, he recently started allowing his wife and the mother of his children to have sex with other men on camera. So it goes without saying that this guy is a psychologically broken sexual deviant. Couple this with his unrepentant admission to grooming, and I wouldn't even be surprised if every last thing people accused him of, even the most sinister crimes, turned out to be true.